Everyone is watching the headlines, but almost no one is asking the question that actually matters. Every news channel is locked into the same narrative. Who is winning between the United States and Iran? Who has the stronger military? Who will strike next? Who will control the outcome? But if you step back for a moment, if you look beyond the explosions and the political statements, a more unsettling reality begins to emerge. Because history has never been decided by the countries that simply fight the hardest. It has always been shaped by those who understand when not to fight at all. Right now, while the world is distracted by conflict, something much bigger is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Economies are shifting. Alliances are adjusting. And power is being redistributed in ways that most people do not yet see. This is not just another regional conflict. This is a moment that could redefine how global power actually works. So instead of asking who is winning the war, we need to ask a far more uncomfortable question. While America and Iran are exhausting themselves in a costly and unpredictable confrontation, who is silently gaining strength from every move they make? Because the most dangerous player in any conflict is not the one making the most noise. It is the one you barely notice. The one that is watching, calculating, and waiting for the exact moment when the outcome is no longer uncertain. And once you see that pattern, once you recognize what is really happening beneath the surface, you cannot unsee it. This is not just about distant governments or abstract strategy. This is about the world you are living in right now and the one you will be forced to live in tomorrow. Every escalation, every decision, every shift in power directly affects the stability of your economy, the value of your currency, the cost of energy, and even the opportunities available to you in the future. When global powers collide, ordinary people do not stand outside the consequences. They absorb them. They feel them through inflation, through uncertainty, through systems that suddenly become unpredictable. And that is exactly why understanding what is really happening behind this conflict matters. Because if you only see what is on the surface, you are already one step behind. The truth is, we are not just witnessing a war. We are witnessing a transition, a slow but powerful shift in how global influence is built, maintained, and ultimately lost. And most people will not realize it until the shift is already complete. The real winner of this conflict is not the country that appears strongest on the battlefield. It is not the one launching the most strikes or making the loudest statements. The real winner is the one that understands that war itself can be a strategic trap. Because war drains resources, it exposes weaknesses, and it forces decisions under pressure. And the most disciplined players in global politics know that the smartest move is not always to engage, but to position right now, while others are focused on immediate outcomes. There is a country that is playing a longer, quieter, and far more calculated game. A country that is not trying to dominate the battlefield, but to shape the environment around it. And that country is China. To understand how this works, you have to step away from modern headlines and go back to a principle that has guided strategy for thousands of years. A principle that still defines how power is built today. In the art of war, there is one idea that stands above all others. The greatest victory is to win without fighting. This is not just a poetic statement. It is a brutally practical rule. It means you do not rush into conflict unless you absolutely have to. You do not waste your strength proving dominance. Instead, you allow your competitors to expose their weaknesses, to drain their own resources, to make costly decisions under pressure. And while they are doing that, you position yourself carefully, patiently, and deliberately. This is the difference between reacting to events and shaping them. One approach is loud, visible, and immediate. The other is quiet, calculated, and far more dangerous in the long run. And if you look closely at what is happening right now, you begin to see that not every major power is playing the same game. Some are responding to the conflict. Others are using the conflict. Now consider what happens if the United States achieves what many would call a clear victory. Imagine Iran is weakened, its leadership destabilized, and American influence over the region expands. On the surface, this looks like success. It looks like control, like dominance, like proof of power. But beneath that surface, there is a different story unfolding. War is never free. It consumes enormous financial resources, stretches political focus, and introduces long-term instability into systems that are already under pressure. The United States is already managing a significant debt burden, and every new military engagement adds to that strain. Over time, this does not just impact budgets. It impacts flexibility, resilience, and the ability to respond to future crises. Victory on the battlefield can translate into vulnerability elsewhere, and this is where the shift begins to matter. Because while one country is spending, committing, and exposing itself to long-term pressure, another is conserving, observing, and strengthening its relative position without taking on those same costs. Now consider the alternative. A scenario where the United States does not achieve a clear victory, where Iran absorbs the pressure, survives the confrontation, and the region moves into a prolonged state of instability. At first glance, this may look like a setback limited to military outcomes, but the deeper consequences are far more significant. Global power is not built only on force. It is built on trust. Trust in a country's ability to maintain stability, to protect critical routes, and to uphold the systems that the rest of the world depends on. For decades, the global economy has relied on a structure in which the US dollar sits at the center, reinforced by its role in global energy trade. But if that system begins to show cracks, if key regions become unstable and the flow of energy becomes uncertain, then confidence begins to weaken. And once confidence weakens, the system itself starts to shift. Countries begin to look for alternatives, not out of ideology, but out of necessity. And China has been preparing for this exact moment by gradually expanding its financial reach, encouraging trade in its own currency, and building relationships that do not rely entirely on existing Western systems. So in this scenario, the consequences go far beyond a single conflict. They begin to reshape the structure of global power itself. But this transformation is not only about currency or perception. It is also about the physical foundations of the global economy. The infrastructure that determines how goods move, how energy flows, and how influence is extended across continents. Over the past decade, China has invested heavily in building networks of roads, ports, railways, and pipelines that connect entire regions together. These are not short-term projects. They are long-term commitments designed to redefine how global trade operates. And within this network, certain locations carry disproportionate importance, acting as critical junctions that link multiple regions at once. Iran is one of those locations. Its position makes it a strategic bridge between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. So any disruption in Iran is not just a regional issue. It is a pressure point within a much larger system. While others are focused on immediate outcomes, China is focused on how these systems evolve over time. It is not simply reacting to events. It is aligning itself with the long-term direction of global connectivity, where influence is determined not just by force, but by control over the pathways that shape the future of trade and energy. If you step back even further, you begin to realize that what we are witnessing is not new. It follows a pattern that has appeared again and again throughout history. A pattern where two dominant powers become locked in conflict, exhausting their strength, while a third power rises quietly in the background. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta, the two leading forces of their time, fought a prolonged and devastating war that drained their economies, weakened their political systems, and shattered their long-term stability. The conflict was intense, visible, and all-consuming. But the most important development was happening elsewhere. Macedon, a rising power to the north, did not rush into the conflict. It observed, it prepared, and it strengthened itself while the dominant powers wore each other down. And when the moment was right, when both Athens and Sparta had lost the capacity to sustain their dominance, Macedon stepped forward and reshaped the entire balance of power. This is the pattern that matters, not the details of any single war, but the structure behind it. Power does not always shift because one side wins. It often shifts because both sides lose enough for someone else to take their place. But it would be a mistake to assume that this outcome is guaranteed or that China's position is without risk. Strategy is never absolute, and no country operates in a vacuum. China's rise is deeply connected to global trade, which means prolonged instability can disrupt the very systems it depends on. Energy routes can become unreliable. Markets can contract, and geopolitical resistance from other nations can intensify. There are internal pressures as well. Economic challenges, demographic shifts, and the constant need to maintain growth and stability at scale. So this is not a story of perfect execution or inevitable dominance. It is a story of relative positioning. In a world where major powers are exposing their weaknesses through conflict, even maintaining stability becomes a strategic advantage. And that is the critical distinction. China does not need everything to go right. It only needs to navigate the situation more effectively than those who are directly engaged in the conflict. Behind all of these strategic calculations, there is a reality that is often ignored but impossible to escape. Wars are discussed in terms of power. influence, and outcomes, but they are experienced in terms of human cost. Every escalation, every disruption, every shift in the global system eventually reaches ordinary people who have no control over the decisions being made. Families face rising costs of living as energy prices fluctuate. Workers deal with uncertainty as markets react to instability. Entire communities are forced to adapt to conditions they did not create. And this is the part of geopolitics that rarely makes headlines. The decisions of powerful nations ripple outward, affecting millions of lives in ways that are slow, cumulative, and deeply personal. This is why understanding these dynamics is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a form of awareness that allows people to better navigate a world that is becoming more unpredictable. Because when systems shift, those who understand the shift early are better prepared to respond to it, even if they cannot control it. What we are witnessing right now is not just a conflict between nations. It is part of a broader transition in the structure of global power. For decades, the world has operated under a system dominated by a single leading power, where economic, political, and military influence were largely concentrated. But that structure is changing. The world is moving toward a more complex arrangement, where multiple centers of power exist, or compete, and cooperate at the same time. This transition will not happen overnight. It will unfold gradually, with periods of tension, uncertainty, and adjustment. Some regions will experience instability, while others will adapt more quickly. But the direction is becoming increasingly clear. Power is no longer defined by a single dimension. It is shaped by the ability to balance economic strength, strategic patience, technological development, and global relationships. And in this evolving landscape, the countries that succeed will not necessarily be the ones that react the fastest, but the ones that understand the shift early and position themselves accordingly. So when we bring everything together, the picture becomes much clearer, and at the same time, far more unsettling. This conflict was never just about who strikes harder or who controls territory in the short term. It is part of a much larger shift in how power is built and transferred in the modern world. When you look at both scenarios, whether the United States achieves a visible victory or struggles to secure its objectives, the deeper pattern remains the same. One side is spending, reacting, and exposing its limitations under pressure. The other is observing, adapting, and strengthening its position without directly engaging in the same costs. History has shown us that the most decisive changes rarely come from the most visible battles, but from the gradual weakening of dominant powers and the quiet rise of those who understand how to position themselves in the gaps that conflict creates. America is focused on the battlefield. Iran is focused on survival. And China is focused on the system that exists beyond both. That is why the real outcome of this situation cannot be measured by immediate results. It will be measured by who emerges stronger when the noise fades and the long-term consequences begin to settle. If this perspective made you pause and rethink what you thought you understood about global events, then you are already seeing something that most people miss. And in a world where information is constant but clarity is rare, that difference matters more than ever. Take a moment to save this video. Because the patterns we discuss today are not limited to this one conflict. They will continue to appear again and again in different forms, shaping the direction of the world in ways that are not always obvious at first. And if you want to stay ahead of those shifts, if you want to understand not just what is happening, but why it is happening, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the goal here is not just to inform, but to help you think more clearly in a world that is becoming more complex every day. The more you understand these patterns, the more prepared you will be for what comes next. And no matter how uncertain the global landscape becomes, clarity, awareness, and the ability to think independently will always be your greatest advantage.